In this video, we will see how we can retrieve the data from database and display it in the front end, that is our view. So that is what we have to do here. Now for sending while for inserting the data, it was pretty much simple that the architecture was from view it is going to controller, from controller I'm modeling the data, and from model I'm sending it, from controller I'm sending it back the model data to my DAO, and DAO after inserting gives the response to the controller, and controller sends back or displays whatever is the message. So here in this video we'll see how we can retrieve it. For retrieving we'll reverse the process. So from DAO we'll write the program to get the data, then we'll create a controller which will get the data first after getting it it will model itself, and then we will get the data. Okay, so first thing first, I'll go and in user DAO I'll write the program to retrieve the data from database. So I'll create a method called as public, then I'll say static, then I'll say I'm getting the data. Yes, and I have to get all the columns here. So if I have all the rows, if I have more than 5 rows, then I have to get 5 rows. If I have 10 rows, I have to get 10 rows. So we may not know how many rows are there, right? So we cannot use arrays for this, and I cannot store array, I cannot create an object of array for this because I have to specify the size. So we will be using collection because it is dynamic, the size need not be specified. So I'll say I have created a list of user model, and once I do this I'll call this as get all user data as my method name, and I don't need to pass in any parameters. Why? Because I'm getting data, I'm not returning anything. Then I'll say list of user model users is equals to new list, new array list of user model, and then I have to go ahead and import this from array list from util. So I have to import all this from util, java.util. So once I have done this, I'll write return of users. So users, we are returning it. Now I have to write the logic of database within this. So within this try catch block, exception E, and then I'll write E dot print stack trace. Now within this, I'll write the logic for connecting to my database and retrieving it. So the first 2 lines will be common. So instead of writing, I can just copy this and I can paste it. Where you're connecting, you're saying the driver name, you're getting the connection. So after getting the connection, then I have to write the statement. So I'll create a simple statement because I'm not preparing a statement. I'm just creating the statement which is having no, undefined values. So I'll say con dot create statement. I have to import statement from only java.util. So you will have many options. Only from java.sql I have to import this. So once I do this, then I'll put it in result set. So result set is responsible for getting the virtual table. So if this table is what I have to fetch, this table is virtually present in your result set. So result set has a virtual table through which we will keep iterating and storing the data or retrieving the data. So smc.execute, I'll say execute query, and the query to execute is very simple. I'll say select star from what is my schema name crud dot table name as user. So I'll just go and copy this and I can paste it there because I'm selecting all the data. So this is the SQL syntax we'll be receiving. Now once this gets executed, okay, I have to import this interface. Okay, so now it's imported. So now this result set rs, this rs will store this complete table in virtual table. So I have to retrieve each and every row, right? So I'll say in while loop, while rs dot next, that means until unless there is next row. So once it comes to 1, it has next row, right? It executes. Now once it comes to 2, after executing 2, it has any other next row? No, right? Then this while loop will stop. That means until unless I'm towards my last row, perform this. Every time you perform, I'll create a user model called as u, and I'll say new user model. So I'll create an object Then I'll say u dot set id, and from where should I get it? So rs is the virtual table which is having this, right? So from rs I'll tell, from rs dot get integer. Why get integer? Because this is of int type, right? Then I'll say the column name id. So this virtual table, what will be stored? What is the column id? Id is the column, right? So that column's data will be stored in this u dot set id, in that this object. Then I'll say u dot set name. So in this object I'm setting the name, and where do I get it from? This rs virtual table what I'm storing, get this name. So I'll say rs dot get string, and then I'll say get the name. Then I'll say u dot set email and get it from rs dot get string called as email from database. Then I'll say u dot set city and get it from rs dot get string called as city. Once I've fetched all the data, then in this users I have to add it, right? So I'll say users dot add this object u, that is, see what I'm adding, user model. So no matter if I have one record or if I have 100 records, all will be stacked up and added in this list of user model. And then finally I'm returning the users, right? So if it is null, that means it has 0 data, and if this is not null, that means there are some data stored in this. So now I have written the DAO part, in which if I call this method, it will return me all the users. Now I have to create a model. No, I already have a model, so I'll go ahead and create a servlet. So I'll create the servlet name as display user, and I'll press finished. Now I don't need this methods, I do not need functions, constructors, and I do not need do post, because I'll be getting the data and displaying from here. I need do post method. To display the data you have to use do post, do get, and to enter the data you can either use get or post. So now here I have to write the logic to get the data from this DAO. So I'll say user DAO dot get all user data, and what will this return? This will return a list of user model, and I'll call it users. Fine. And here I have to import from java.util your list. So once this is done, now I can either display the data from here, or I can go ahead and I can display it in the view, that is in a JSP file. So I have to display all the data in the JSP file. So how do I iterate it and display? So that we will be seeing now. So once this is done, now I have to send the data from here to my JSP. And how do I do that? So I can do that using a request dispatcher. So I'll use a request dispatcher interface, and I'll call this as dispatcher is equals to request dot get request dispatcher. So I have to search get request dispatcher, and I have to specify the path where I'm sending the data. So I'm sending the data to I'll say view user.jsp. So I'm sending the data to view user.jsp. So here I'm sending the data. So what is the data I have to send? First let me import this request dispatcher. So what is the data I'm sending? Users, right? So I'll say dispatcher dot, okay, a small typo mistake, I'll copy this, and I'll say dispatcher dot add attribute. Sorry, it will be dispatcher dot set attribute. So we have to use set attribute. And what is the attribute I'm setting? So I'll give this attribute name as user, and what is the data I have to send? It is users. So I have to use this in order to send the data from view to my, from controller to my servlet. So this is how I can send the data. Now there are various ways you can do it. You can directly do it in your JSP, you can directly do it in your model, you can directly do it in your DAO, but that won't be a proper use of MVC architecture. So if you have to use MVC architecture, then we have to do it properly. Okay, so here it will be request dot set attribute. Sorry, typo mistake. Request dot set attribute. So in request, I'm sending this as a response. Then I'll say dispatcher dot forward request comma response. So whatever is this request, it will take back to my view user dot JSP, and there I will be displaying the data. Now to display the data, as I said, it's very simple. I have to create a JSP file and I have to display the data. So now view user.jsp is the file what I have to create. So I'll go to my web content and I'll create new JSP file and I will use view user.jsp and I'll say finished. So my JSP file is ready. Here I'll give title as display user. So it will display the user. Now before doing that, I'll first create a center tag and I'll say h1 tag and I'll say display user data, and then I'll create a table where I'll be displaying the data in table. So in t head I'll create the headings. So the first one would be, so I have to display 4 data, right? So the first one is my ID, then I'll say name, then I'll say email, and I'll say city. This is what I have to display. Then in T body, I'll display the body. So I'll say a TR. Also have to put this all headings inside TR. So I'll say this within this TR tag, I have to display all this headings. Yes. Then same way in body, within this TR tags, I have to display TD, that is table data. So I'll have 4 data being displayed here. So for now I'll just write no need to write anything. We'll write it directly. So now if I run this view GSP and check if my front end is working or if it's ready and I can display the data. So we have still not written the program to get the data and display it. We are just verifying if my view JSP is displaying some table. So yes, here I have the table. Yes. Okay. So now I can write the program to get the data. So now when I'm getting the data to this, I have to write in JSP to catch the data to get the data. So how do I write? So how to write Java code in JSP, you have to use scriptlets. So what type of data am I receiving? So I'm receiving list of user model, right? And I'll call it as user is equals to, then I'll say request dot get attribute, and what is the attribute name I need? So what is the attribute name we set here? See here, what is my attribute name? User, right? So I'll go ahead and I'll write this user attribute here. Then I have to import this list. You won't get any suggestions here. For that you have to use another scriptlet here. I'll use another scriptlet with @page, and then I'll say import is equals to, I have to import them. So I'll say java.util.star, import all this, and then I'll say from model, I have to import even model, right? Model.star. So even this models will be included. This package, see this, from this package I have this. Now you get an error because what you're getting here is an object and here is a list. So I have to typecast it to list of user model. So I'm typecasting this object what I'm getting to a user model and store it in a object called as user. So this is the list user what will be having the list of data. Okay. Now that should be displayed here in this TR. Yes. So I'll cut this, I'll copy that and cut it, and I'll write the for loop here. So I'll say for, I'll say user model M for every user, and I'll say opening the bracket, and after some lines I'll write the scriptlet and I'll close the bracket. So my for loop starts here, ends here, and within this I will write TR. That means for every data this will be iterated, that is every row will be iterated and data will be displayed. How do you display the data? So if you remember, we have an expression tag. Yes. Now in this expression tag, I'll say m dot get ID. So it will get the ID of that user. Then I'll say m dot get name, which will get the name of that. Then I'll say in my expression tag m dot get email, and I'll say m dot get city. So from every object it will get this detail and display in my view.jsp. Now we have completed the program to send the data and receive the data. Now very important part it is, which file should I execute in order to make this working? Now if I run this JSP file, it will give me an error. I'll tell you why. First I'll show you what is the error and then I'll explain you why. So I get this error. The reason is in my JSP file, even this is executed Java code, yes? So I'm saying list of user and I'm saying me to get me user file. And when will this get me file? It will only get when this line is executed, right? Only when this method is executed, I'll be getting data from database. Before that, I cannot get, right? So this is the first thing that should be executed. Then only I can have this data that is being displayed. So we will execute this servlet, and after executing, we will pass on to view.jsp. That is, I'll say, after doing this, kindly jump to view.jsp, and while you're jumping, please carry this data along you. And what is the data? Complete users from database. So I should not run the JSP file when I'm retrieving, but in fact the controller, that is the servlet. So I'll say display user run as run on server, and I'll press finish. So you see, so what happens here? It executes this line which gets the data from database, and from request dispatcher I'm saying please jump to this view user.jsp, and along with that carry this data. So once this is done, then finally this line says forward. So my compiler will jump here. Okay, my server will jump here. My Tomcat server, it will jump to this, and then it will render this complete thing. And while rendering, then it will get the data. So at that time, it will have the attribute user and it will perform this. So because I have two records, this for loop is iterated twice and I get this data. So it's very simple to retrieve the data, and using this MVC architecture, it becomes more simpler to organize the data. And here, how did we use the MVC architecture? First, we wrote the DAO part. Then we came to controller. We got the data from DAO. We modeled it, and that model data, we sent it to our view. We did the reverse of the insertion. So this is how we retrieve the data from database using CRUD operation. So in next videos, we'll see how to create, how to update and delete the user records.